Right. Well, I am super, super excited to welcome our dear friends and close colleagues, James Robertson and Phil Styrlund from the Summit Group, based in America. So James and Philip, welcome to the Sales Transformation Podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Squire. The great reunion has finally happened. Thank you for making it happen.
Thank you, Phil. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no, it really, I'm so excited about this because, yeah, just for the benefit of our listeners, the relationship with Phil and James and the Summit Group go way back. We were in fact brought together by a mutual client that we had, Compact Computers, all those years ago. You didn't think I'd be going back that far, Phil, I don't think.
Good recollection, my friend.
Yeah, no, it goes back an awfully long way, and we've both been on sort of incredible journeys. James and Philip, clearly, operating out of the States and us in Europe, and we've done multiple projects together over the years, and they've all been absolutely fabulous fun. But the reason why we're together for this podcast is to talk about the incredible journey that James and Philip have been on with their doctorate and their research. I think, as many of the listeners will know, there are not that many people who've done a doctorate in sales in our profession. They've come to this at a certain stage in their lives, qualifying, I think it was last year, if I'm not mistaken. And the purpose of the Sales Transformation Podcast is to ask James and Philip to kind of share the journey that they went on, during the doctorate, to talk about their findings and to share their insights about how they see the future of sales. So broadly speaking, and before I sort of go into direct questions, the way we'd like to structure this particular podcast is to focus on three, if you like, strands. One is around hindsight, sort of getting Phil and James to share their incredibly long pedigree, I'd say, in sales through their sales careers, but also to give them a chance to talk about their reflections of the sales industry in general, the kind of insights that they've had as a consequence of the research journey that they've embarked on, and what sort of insights they developed during the doctorate, and foresights in the sense of actually looking at the future and the future of sales. So broadly speaking, these are the three areas that we're going to talk about. But before we go into the nuts and bolts of the research that they've done, I would love for Phil, then James, maybe to just give a quick potted history about who you are, where you've come from, a little bit of your sort of career in sales, before we get started into the doctorate itself. So Phil, can I ask you just to introduce yourself?
I would rather defer to my better half, Dr. James Robertson, to open it up. And
Okay.
James, you begin, then I will introduce myself, but I'd love to have you go first, my friend.
Great. So Phil Squire, because we've got two Phils on the call. Thank you for the privilege of your time and for this opportunity to collaborate. The genesis of us being here is you. I think you've been an inspiration to a lot of people, and I think you were the incentive or the motivation for us to start the doctorate in the first place. So I don't know whether to thank you or curse you, because it was quite a journey.
I'm sure you did both.
Thank you. So a little bit, James Robertson, sales, marketing, account management's in my blood. I was part of the doctoral journey is reflection. And I look back and say, why am I doing what I'm doing? And I look back to my father. He was a marketing director for Unilever in Africa, and figuring out how to sell soap and healthcare beauty products in that part of the world. And as I look at that, that's sort of what I've continued to do. I've worked now lived in 4 continents, and always in this realm of sales and marketing. So just a privilege to be here. Over the last 15 years, I've had the honor of working with Phil Styrlund, and there's a little bit of a story about how that came about. And the beauty of that has been that we get to work with clients across industries across the planet, and we see these patterns of excellence and areas where companies and people are really struggling. And I think it's that fascination with how our organization is going to work and perform in the future that really motivates me and motivated me to start the doctorate in the first place. Thank you.
James, thank you. That's brilliant. Phil, can I hand over to you?
2 things. Phil, I want to just put a punctuation mark on your opening comments about our relationships. And I hope, if anything, this podcast can serve as a verbal billboard for why deep relationships matter in life. 3 of us have been together longer than I can remember, at least 20 years, both first as deep friends, second as business partners. And as I look back on life as I get older, relationships aren't an accessory to life, they are central to life. And so the 2 men I'm looking at on this screen as this podcast, these are the relationships here matter so deeply. And if there's one message for anybody listening, if you want to have a rich and fulfilling life, focus on relationships. And I hope that anyone listening is blessed to have the kind of friends that I have in Phil Squire and James Robertson. So I just want to put that on the table. Now, myself was in corporate for 24 years in sales, then left corporate and providentially was able to buy the Summit Group. Little did I know that it would be the container for the rest of my life. Little did I know that it would be the catalyst to meet the great friend and business partner of James Robertson, what I call providential partner of my life. And so it's funny how business works, isn't it? But I think for all of us, there's very little separation between our business life and our personal life, because this is our life's work. I don't know when I'm working and I don't know when I'm not. I don't think I'll ever retire because this is just my life. Sales is my life. And I was thinking in preparation for this, why am I so preoccupied? And of all of the things, why did I choose selling? And James, I don't know if I'm speaking for you or not, probably somewhat. Winston Churchill once said, business is the horse that pulls the social cart. And I believe sales is the fuel that fuels the horse. And so I've always believed, and my father taught me, if you want to help the poor, sell something, get a job, create profit, because capitalism is the greatest way to help humankind, and sales is the oxygen of it. So to me, sales is not about the numbers. It's about the higher order value that it brings to life and the economy and society, if that makes sense. That's why.
Well, it makes so much sense, and it's interesting, and I think it's I think one of the areas that has drawn my interest has been the traditional silk routes of many hundreds and thousands of years ago. And one of the things that's interesting when you follow the silk route and you start to visit some of the great trade hubs that are on the silk route, whether it's Persepolis or Palmyra, or whether it's the City of Kings in Sicily, you begin to see the connection between trade and culture, and trade and health, and trade and music. And this is replicated not just with the land-based silk routes, but the great maritime silk routes of Cheng He in the 1400s.
Right.
And it's quite interesting that, and I know that we share the same passion, for sales, and we see its link almost as a precursor. Without trade, some of these things that we talk about in terms of culture and music and diversity, so many of these things wouldn't happen. Yet sales for many, many years has not been recognized, I think, as the precursor to much of what we really appreciate in life outside of trading per se. Sales has always had a slightly, particularly in Europe, maybe not so much in America, but slightly tarnished image. And I think what you've been doing with the Summit Group and what we've been doing at Consalia has sort of shared a common vision for the passion we have about sales and the reason why we, like you say, it's sort of become a life's work. I think that's a very good way of putting it.
I want to build on what James said about you too, Phil. I remember when we first met, one of the great gifts you gave me and to us is to put words to what we were thinking. And words like, and I'm going to use your words now, the nobilization of selling, the profession of selling, to make selling the world's most sought after profession. I had those feelings, but I didn't have the words to express them. And you brought the words that made sense to me and to others. And for that, we thank you.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, thank you, Phil and James, for the wonderful introductions you've both made. So I just want, before we go into the detail of your research, I just want the listeners to understand the role that the Summit Group play in the professionalization of sales in the USA, but particularly, I know you're global, and I know you work with a lot of US companies all over the world, all over the planet, as you said earlier. But actually, you do play a very important role in one of the most important institutions in sales in America, which is the Summit Group. And I think that the Summit Group, for the listeners, are thought leaders alongside a number of other organizations as well, but they're definitely regarded in America as thought leaders. And within that community, Phil and James are probably the only people who've gone on and done a doctorate. Am I right in saying that?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
I bet you I'm right. I bet you I'm right on that one. So let me know if I'm wrong. I'm sure we can correct.
There you go.
Correct it. But so what I'm trying to say is you've got a point of view about sales which is really worth listening to, and I think it's very much encapsulated in the research, in the doctorate that you both have done. So let's move on to the doctorate, and what I'd like to explore here, perhaps in the first instance, is what drew you to doing a doctorate in the first instance, because it's a hell of a commitment to make. You're both incredibly busy people. So what was the draw? What was the reason for you both doing it? I don't know who to direct it to, whether it's James or Phil. I don't mind.
I'll start with James, the adult.
Yeah, thanks, Phil, for the question. So what inspired us to start the doctorate? I think firstly it was you, by the way, again, sorry to give you all the credit, but you've paved the way for professionalizing sales and doing your doctorate. And I think where the Consalia and the Summit Group often come together is based on some of the research that you did around sales mindsets and the behaviors that really are going to distinguish salespeople. So I'd say for sure we give you credit for where we started. The other one is Phil, and Phil cares to share. There's a deeper reason why Phil wanted to do the doctorate. And Phil and I have worked really closely together over the last. We first met in a conference room in South Sweden in 2003, and we've worked really closely since then. So I think back to people and relationships, a lot of the reason we started was the two of you on this podcast. I think the other thing is I've just got a fascination for the future. What is the future going to look like, and how are we going to thrive and survive in that world? And in order to do that, I know we have to keep learning. I've always loved learning. And I think if you look back over the last 20 years, we've been running so fast, we haven't had the time to step back and say, what have we actually done and learned? And what does that mean for the future? So I think that was the real gift that the doctorate gave us. We had a professor who was holding our hand through the journey, Professor Brian Sutton, give him tremendous credit, as along with Middlesex University. But it gave us the opportunity to step back and reflect and say, where is the world now and where are we headed? And, we all feel and know there's just a tremendous amount of change going on. So I think that was really the impetus, is look back, but look back in order to look forward.
I've found that as I get older and I look at people who are not just successful, but are significant in their life, have taken time to make sense of their life. And to James's point, what we wanted to do is take a structural retrospective of what brought us here. In both in life and career, what brought us here? You live life forward, but you understand it backwards. But we wanted to take time to understand it backwards, and the doctorate was the framework to do that. Secondly, I personally wanted to also upgrade my intellectual operating system. I just wanted to learn how to think at a higher level, not just for business, but for life. And I knew, Phil, based on your guidance, that was a big part of the discipline and rigor of the doctorate. Now, candidly, it's harder than I ever thought it was. In fact, in hindsight, if I knew it was going to be that hard, we probably wouldn't have done it. I hate to say it, but it's just true. It was far more difficult than I ever anticipated, but far valuable than I could ever have imagined.
Could I ask, Phil, what
Please.
When you said it was far more difficult, I mean, what was the difficult bit for it? What did you find challenging?
Well, I'll just speak personally. I'm a big picture guy. I'm not a writer. And so just the act of writing was difficult. However, I've understood why writing matters, because if you can't write something, you haven't thought well enough. But it was painful, but it was valuable. And number two was just the sheer rigor of it. It's easy to write, something long, but it's easy to addify. It's hard to stratify. And Brian Sutton, as I call him, the doctorate with skin, because this man was the wise counsel, the wise Sherpa. He was our living doctorate. And he forced us to clarify our thinking. That's hard, but again, it's valuable. So, and then finally, I think, so number one, a retrospective. Number two, to upgrade my intellectual operating system. And third is to leave an artifact for the future, a roadmap for our firm, the Summit Group, and a roadmap for the industry that has given so much to both myself and James.
Yeah. James, I don't know if you want to add any more to what Phil has said there.
Why was it challenging?
Yeah. So it was a challenge, because I think also you had two of you doing it. That must have been a bit of a challenge. You're both coming at it from perhaps slightly different angles, but was it the written work for you? Or
I think the two main, just to build on what Phil said, the two main challenges. Number one, it challenged a lot of our assumptions. We read more broadly and deeply than I think I've read for a long time about things that we didn't really know or understand. And how do you integrate that, and that sort of a transdisciplinary thinking in a way? How do you integrate some of these ideas into what we're doing? And as we talk a little in a short while, we'll share with you some of the things that came to us that we had no idea we were going to uncover. So I think there was a lot of challenging assumptions. And I think the other one is, clients engage us because we're practical. We can take ideas and concepts and we can help them apply and implement them in their world. And I think what in a way was a little bit of a conflict initially was between sort of an academic approach to building a doctorate and a pragmatic practitioner approach that we take. And yet at the outcome, it's the fusion of those two that really built, I think, our learning and insights in the doctorate. But initially, I'm afraid the practical side of us and the academic side of us were a little bit one up against the other.
Yeah. No, I 100% relate to that. I think sales is very much a sort of verbal expression, isn't it? We're taught how to, ask questions, to present. The written word is something that is not given that much focus. So I completely get about the you know, the act of writing is important, but Phil, as you were saying as well, you know, and I felt the same, it's being able to condense your thinking into something quite succinct, to the point, well referenced, well researched, is actually quite a challenge. But James, to your point about reflection, is that, and you may like to talk more about this, what I found as being one of the great benefits of doing the research doctorate is you come into it with a certain frame of reference, because that's obviously based on your experience, the context of the world in which you've lived, your points of view. And you go through a period, I certainly did, where you suddenly are wanting or having to let go perhaps of some of the preconceptions, the ideas that you've actually had. And that's quite hard to begin with when you're beginning to challenge and question, and with people like Brian Sutton this sort of challenging you, I'm quite sure. But, you know, when you start to sort of move out of that sort of, I call it the valley of despair, you know, the valley, when you move out of that, it's just incredibly empowering to sort of suddenly see the world in a different way. And it gives you that sort of layer of knowledge and appreciation of wisdom, I think, as well, because you've gone through that sort of pain barrier. And I'm sure both of you went through a little bit of that as well when you were in the midst of doing it.
And Phil, to your point, you know, as I use this metaphor of upgrading your intellectual operating system,
Yeah.
At least for me, the three thought platforms that influenced me was, number one, reflective practice.
Yeah.
Which in quick summary is attack your assumptions.
Yeah.
The second was appreciative inquiry, which in quick summary is build on what's working. And third is Bayesian thinking, which is constantly update your decision-making based on new facts.
Yeah.
And those three, call them thought platforms, inserted into my brain have helped me see life and business differently.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more question about the experience of doing the doctorate before we go into the detail of your particular findings. Is that, you know, sales is such a fast-paced environment. It's, you know, when we look at the people that we're working with, you know, they barely have time to breathe, let alone think. Yet you have, through this process, gone through an incredible level of deep thinking, you know, about what it is you're doing. Like you said, sort of questioning your assumptions and so on. Given the academic nature of the doctorate, is it something that you would recommend other people to do in sales, or do you think it's something just for the few minority that are stupid enough, maybe not the right phrase, crazy enough, you know, to do it? I mean, what do you think?
If I comment, I think there's a lot of life is about paradoxes and managing the paradoxes. So Phil, as you said, and we see that with all of our clients, they're running faster, their world is more complex. And as a result, you don't have time to really think and reflect. And yet the doctorate presents that opportunity. So how do you manage that paradox? And I think the key takeaway from us is that you have to be able to do that in order to really reflect on what you've done to guide you where you're going to go in the future. I wish I'd done it a little bit earlier maybe in my career. I think I would have been thinking differently instead of running faster for the last 20 years.
Phil, I'm going to steal your language when you say sales is a thinking game. And so it is important to rigorously upgrade your thinking, because that is the future of selling, is how you think. And so one of the challenges I have for all listeners is to look at yourself and say, how can I create my own proprietary thought model, kind of my intellectual signature that I bring both, again, to life and business? Because one of the takeaways that I brought from the doctorate is the soft stuff is now the hard stuff, and the hard stuff is going to AI. It's the human factors that are going to define us and the future of the industry. So yes, I think bringing rigor to your thought has never mattered more.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And at a sort of lower level, yeah, not a lesser level, but nonetheless still really impactful, is that we're seeing that those going through the master's programs, going through a similar exercise of reflection, but not, obviously it's not a 3 or 4 year, research project they're doing, but it's the reason why I think we're beginning to see this fusion. You mentioned it earlier, Phil, the fusion between sort of the academic and the business, or was it James? I can't remember now. The fusion between those two disciplines coming together is just, just fantastic, isn't it? The rigor that you get from the academic side and how you think applied to the practical nature of how we do business is just a fantastic combination. And I'm, pretty surprised that we don't do more of that.
Right.
Agree.
And
But
by the
we're
way, there's also a reward to it. One of the reasons that, again, I chose to do it is I wanted to do something hard later in life.
Yeah.
Very honest with you. In hindsight, I'm surprised you actually got through it, but it felt very, very good to accomplish it. I'm not going to deny that, especially later in life. It helps your confidence and your competence.
Yeah.
Not about that.
And the wonderful thing as well, I mean, I joke about it when it comes to sort of reflecting on my doctorate, that my doctorate took 4 years to do, I think slightly longer than yours. And at the end of it, I came out with 4 things. 4 things. Yes. Oh my goodness, maybe 6, maybe 8 if you want to look at the 4 positive mindsets and the 4 negative. That was the sum conclusion of 4 years of work. But actually the journey to getting there was just incredible. But the fact is that you can focus in on something that you really care about. This is what the doctorate does. You really care about, and out of it, you distill from that the essence of something that goes into your thinking for the future. It's incredibly empowering, and enriching process. So let's now focus on you and the topic of your doctorate. So I don't know, again, whether James or Phil want to kind of talk about, what was your concern? What was your inquiry? What was the problem that you were trying to solve, with your research into sales?
I think what it started was looking at where sales is today, and reflecting on the dynamic. So we mapped, and again, building on a lot of what you've done, Phil, and what is in some of the writings around the world and trends, was we called them eras of selling. And what we observed when we mapped the eras of selling against a number of key criteria, we've seen a complete shift in the direction of these influences or powers. So maybe that doesn't reveal anything substantial, but it said to us that the world is changing and will continue to change, and the way that the world that the sales professional is operating in has and will continue to fundamentally shift. We didn't know the answer as to where that's going to be, or what are going to be the capabilities that are going to enable us to be successful in the future. But I think part of the doctorate was it was a journey, and we were interested to try and figure out what is that going to look like. I don't know that we've come to all the answers, but the fun is, I think we've uncovered some quite interesting dimensions that we think are going to enable how sales organizations, how sales professionals really do thrive and survive and perform in the future.
I think what we did unearth, Phil, on that journey that James is referencing is, number one, back to the eras of selling,
Yeah.
that one of the things we can say for sure is that the ideology that underpins the profession of selling has fundamentally shifted. From in the past, it has been based on the art of persuasion, which is what I call a push ideology.
Yeah.
Today in the future, it's based on exactly the opposite, an alignment ethos, which is a pull ideology. And nothing could be more pronounced than that. There's been a fundamental shift in the polarity of the thinking and ideology that underpins selling. And I think that's both exciting, and that also represents this great big shift in the era that James has referenced. That is, to me, the biggest takeaway that we believe in and also validated. I think the second one is that these human factors, which I referenced earlier, and we focused in on two areas of character and mindset, are two kind of core human factor pillars that inform this new role of strategic sales and the thinking that's going to be required for the future. And I think it can be codified in a single sentence that came from Dr. Fred Kiel. Who you are will matter more than what you do. Because AI will always be able to do more than us as far as the functionality. But now it's our character and how we think and how we show up to others. That will be the ultimate distinguisher. I think that was probably the second biggest takeaway. And I think the third one is this: relationships will matter more than ever. We started out this discussion about relationships, but they're going to matter more than ever in a world where AI will take over, but you can't be in a relationship with a machine.
So can I come back to the comment you made about the eras, and you think that you believe, and I think we share similar views, that, the nature of selling is fundamentally shifted, and you talk about it shifting from a push much more to a pull. Yet, and whilst you were going through this sort of thinking about the different eras and looking at how most sales organizations think that they need to go about their sales approach. So sort of relating your observations of the eras and then looking at the way in which organizations out there were implementing selling strategies. What did that connection between what you saw in practice sort of mapping against the eras? What went, what have you noticed? What have you observed? I don't think I've asked this question very clearly, but hopefully you can make some sort of sense of it.
I think the thing that we observe every day in our own lives, by the way, but also the lives and organizations of our clients is they're trying to do more with less. They're running fast, so they don't have the time to, as you were saying earlier, Phil, to step back and reflect and think. So I think what we observe is you have, it's almost a fork in the road. If you're a sales leader in the sales profession, you can run faster and try to do more and be more efficient. I think we still see that's the bulk of organizations. We're trying to, how do we actually get better at what we already do? And I think one of the key things we came across on our doctoral journey is work from Bob Keegan, Nick Petrie, Torbett, around what's known as vertical development. The best analogy for that comes from Petrie, in our opinion, is sales organizations are trying to do more faster by putting more knowledge and process and capability and skills into a container that is a glass or a container that has one size. And that just means we're overloaded. I think that's one of the ramifications in terms of mental health that we're seeing in the industry. It's people just trying to run faster and do more with less. The other fork in the road is say, yes, we need to be efficient, and we need to be able to build capacity to do more and operate more effectively in a world that's going to continue to get more complex. So I think the journey or the path we went on, and this is what we're starting to integrate into our practice and work with clients, is how do you not only continue to get more effective and efficient at what you do, but how do you build the capacity to do that without burning yourself out?
And it's like this coffee cup, Phil, we're finding many organizations just want to pour more into the cup.
Yeah.
But to James's point, as human beings, we only have the capacity for
Yeah.
so much. And a lot of mental health is we're spilling over. With what we found is the key now is to build a bigger cup, to expand capacity.
Yeah.
Now, we don't see many organizations thinking like that yet, to be honest with you. I'd love to tell you that we see, enlightenment in many
Yeah.
organizations. It's still in the minority.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting one because, you both have been on this incredible journey and you completely get the notion of capacity. You've studied it and you have got, and I'm sure we'll come on to this a bit later on. What do you think are the critical components of what may build capacity? You've mentioned one of them already with reflective practice, perhaps, but so I think that this notion, the language that you're speaking is very different to the language that sales directors potentially are speaking, who are in this world of quarterly driven results, performance, burnout because of the huge pressures they're under. And, it takes a particular type of client to suddenly start to look at sales performance through a different lens. I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but that's certainly how we're seeing things, ourselves with our clients.
Absolutely. I think this kind of development takes a longer term view. And if you're really focused on short-term targets, it's very difficult. Again, another paradox. How do we manage the long term and the short term? So I think what we're seeing, some organizations are starting to invest in the long term, and that's about the fundamentals of reflective practice, mindset, character, who we are, back to Dr. Fred Keeling. Yeah.
So can I just so just on just to maybe finish off on the hindsight's kind of piece. So as you were doing the doctorate, am I right in saying that you began to question the fundamental principles that many companies have adopted, perhaps yourselves as well, about what it takes to, create sales performance in the era in which we're operating today? That's part of the journey that you took. You began to question, are we doing the right things? And are your clients doing the right things? Sorry, James.
Absolutely. I think if Phil Styrlund, if I look at our work over the last 15 years or so, and it's a little bit how my brain works, it's been very architecturally process, knowledge, skills, competence focus, sort of this linear process development. And I think we've got quite good at that. Our relationship with the Strategic Account Management Association, we're on the faculty, on the board. It's been a lot of, how do we get better? How do we have more knowledge and competence? We've been ignorant. I'm talking for myself, but maybe for some other people, we've been ignorant that there are other ways to learn, tapping into some of the thought leaders that are really thinking about adult learning and development. And that kind of vertical development takes time. So organizations don't have the patience for that.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. I'd love to ask you your point of view also, because I think if you're looking, within the time we've been working together, we've seen this phenomenal surge in 2011 to maybe 2018, maybe 20 of the Challenger sale and the kind of principles that was espousing. And so many organizations were talking about, well, the Challenger sale is the route to market to go. And, clearly they've had a huge amount of success on the back of that, which is this teach, tailor, take control kind of approach. Do you have a point of view about that kind of methodology in the era in which organizations are functioning together? Does it have a role to play? Or do you think that's part of this push analogy that you're, referring to? Is that sort of fueling the push approach, which you think is fundamentally different? You've gone quiet with that question.
James, your thoughts, or would you like me to take it?
Phil, you take it.
Phil, I think the challenger ideology has some positive elements, but I still
Yeah.
think it's a lot of push ideology with a coat of paint. And I'm going to use again, Phil Squire, your language of the difference between tactful audacity and arrogance.
Yeah.
Because part of this new ethos of alignment and pull is that listening is the new solving.
Mm.
And part of one of the new acumens is professional noticing
Yeah.
and structured listening. Then, after you've listened, then is to be, as you would say, tactfully provocative and provide some relevant insights. But I think it's
Yeah.
very, very careful how you manage that
I
balance.
agree. I 100% agree. And I've been slightly provocative, I suppose, in asking such a direct question at this stage. But and I agree with you, that a lot of the principles behind the Challenger sale, I think, were commendable and interesting and quite creative. But I think that potentially in the wrong hands or with insufficient context of what are the core principles about that particular approach, you could end up actually creating a completely wrong impression, with clients. And so I think it's got a lot, and it did a lot, I think, for the sales profession. If we're looking back at the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, I think it's done a lot to elevate the kind of a new way of thinking about sales. But I think what we're questioning is, given, the future and the way we see the markets going, is that approach does it have a place? Yeah. Question
And
mark.
so a lot of this goes back to your research, what we now
Yeah.
call the London School research, what customers seek. And if I recall, Phil, one of the things you found that customers didn't seek was arrogance.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
and framing metaphor is that I think strategic selling in the future is a form of business therapy.
Yeah.
And what great therapists do first is listen
Yeah.
deeply, intently, and structurally before they provide counsel.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you say about relationships, which you focused on so much, because I think in some of the research that came out of that book, they talked about that the role of the relationship manager was slightly diminished in view of what's important in terms of being creating a source of competitive advantage. But we'll come back to that point perhaps a little bit later on. But I think it's important. I think both yourselves and us believe that there has been a fundamental shift in the way that we need to think about sales, and that we are now operating in very much a different era, and a new language needs to be created. And I think you're helping to build on that with the outputs of your doctorate, which I think is amazing.
And
Okay.
Phil, I just
Yeah.
want to put a bow on one of your thoughts there. You talked about sales leadership for just a moment. What we see is of the distinguishing sales leaders is they're focusing on their people first, because they're realizing that talent is what drives financial outcomes. And never in all the 40 some years I've been in the profession of selling have I seen such a stark correlation between talent and the numbers. No
Okay.
talent, no financial outcome. It's never been more obvious.
Yeah.
Your culture is the engine.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the right talent, the numbers won't be there. So back to great sales leaders, focus on your people as your customer.
Fantastic. Okay. So, can we move on to insights now? And you've begun to talk about character and mindsets and so on. And you mentioned the work of our great friend, your great friend. I've introduced to him Dr. Fred Keel, and his concepts around return on character, which I think has played such a big role in your thinking. also about sales. So what do we mean by character? I guess that's the first question. What do we mean by character?
Well, I think first of all, let's place it in context of what James mentioned earlier. One of our great findings is the need for more vertical development. So let's just frame that for 30 seconds.
Okay.
Horizontal development is building your breadth. It's building your acumen, which matters deeply. And if you look back on the history of sales training, it has been very much a horizontally based industry of building acumens. That doesn't go away. What now matters as much or more is vertical development. And on that vertical axis, James and I have just really broken it down into three components. Number one is building cognitive capacity. Yes, your intellect, how you think. It's what we've talked about earlier. Number two is your character, which I'll come back to in a minute. And then third is your mindset, which is the work, Phil, that you've started and that we built on. We kind of see those as the three building blocks of that vertical axis. Does that make sense so far?
I think it's really interesting the way I've heard you talk about this before, but I'm sort of getting very much a visual of this now, you know, in the way that you're talking about this vertical and horizontal. So just to kind of, so at the horizontal level, am I right if I just summarize what you're describing? We're very much looking at the sort of base competencies and knowledge and skills, if you like, that you need to have to be able to perform your role, in this case as salespeople. Yeah, the vertical is looking deeper. It's looking beyond that, as you say, to character, to values and mindsets and cognitive thinking, which you describe as reflective practice.